Welcome to Experiencing Life. Experiencing Life is a series of 12 trips designed to let you get out and really experience living things and concepts of biology. They are also designed to expose you to some of the experiences that every human life should have. Those experiences that make life meaningful, exciting, interesting, and fulfilling. I've always believed since I was in grade school that learning is so much easier and impactful on a field trip where you can experience things than it is in a classroom or even on a video like this. So Experiencing Life is really a series of 12 big field trips with biology as the main focus. These videos are meant to provide an orientation for the trips so you know what to expect when you go. Because one of the core principles of Experiencing Life is that everything is connected, the topics of the trips will sometimes branch out into the other sciences, but they will be addressed in the context of how they relate to life. But sometimes the topics will leave science altogether. Why not follow the Oregon Trail to start Trip 5, or Route 66 to start Trip 7 and learn a little history along the way? The focus, though, will always be on biology. Within biology, the topics will range from cells to genetics to ecology to biodiversity and evolution. A major focus of these topics will be on experiencing the wide variety of types of living things in natural environments. Natural environments provide the most meaningful setting for experiencing life. There's a hierarchy of meaningfulness when it comes to learning about organisms. Least meaningful is reading about them in a book, even if it has pictures. While reading is fundamental, it is more meaningful if it is done alongside a more tangible experience. Next comes videos. Motion can add a little more context than still images or text, but it has limitations as far as portraying the scale of some things and limits the context you're able to see. More meaningful than video is an actual visit to a place where you can experience things firsthand. Visits like these can be split into two types: natural and artificial environments. The most meaningful type of visit is one that takes you to a natural environment where things are as they should be in the world. Whenever possible, the trips take you to these types of environments. But sometimes it is not possible, or at least not practical, to experience something in its natural environment. Very few of us are going to hop into one of those tiny submarines to experience deep-sea organisms in their natural environment. And since this first series of 12 trips is limited to the United States, there are many organisms that just do not exist here in natural environments. To experience these organisms, we will have to go to artificial environments like zoos and gardens. These experiences, while not as good as those in natural environments, are at least better than those from videos. With this as our framework, we are to become watchers of life. Not just bird watchers, life watchers. As any bird watcher will tell you, it is very exciting when you see something that you've never seen before in real life. The same applies to all types of living things, from birds and other animals, to plants, fungi, and even microorganisms. The goal is not to see as many different species as possible, but to see something representative of every broad category of organisms. The most basic goal is to experience something from every phylum of life. For some phyla, we want to go deeper and experience every class, order, or family. For instance, within our phylum of humans, Chordata, we are in the class of mammals, and the goal is to experience something from every family of mammals. Not every species of mammal, but every family. We'll get into that in more detail as we go, but the point is that diversity on the large scale rather than the small scale is the goal. With modern biodiversity at the center of things, we will also look at biodiversity from the past and discuss some of the details that explain how living systems work. To summarize, the three goals of experiencing life are the following. Number 1, to understand the connections of the natural world through space and time. Number 2, to observe and learn about the diversity of environments and organisms in their natural settings whenever possible. Number 3, a third goal I haven't even mentioned yet, is to experience and understand the geography of the United States and, indirectly, the world. So that explains what we want to learn and experience. Now let's look at the trips that will help us towards our goals. The 12 markers on the map here represent the general area covered by each of the 12 trips. All of the trips are contained within the United States, so there's no need for a passport or a second language. You can do all but the final 2 trips from a car or other road vehicle. Each trip is intended to take 2 to 3 weeks for the core destinations, but alternative stops for each trip could easily double the time if you have it. The first 10 trips are all within the contiguous U.S., also known as the Lower 48. The first 4 trips cover all the basics of biology, and the remaining 8 trips go into more depth and show more diversity. Let's go over each trip in a little detail. Trip 1 in dark green is made up of the 4 sites labeled by the markers. In this trip, we will be introduced to the basic units of biology, cells. The 2 main types of cells, prokaryotes and eukaryotes, will be introduced and contrasted, and some of the functions of cells will be explored. Trip 1 was chosen as a way to experience cells because of the 2 main sites of the trip, Yellowstone and the Great Salt Lake. For different reasons, these sites have areas that act as petri dishes, which allow us to experience microscopic cells on a scale we can relate to. Yellowstone has areas with extremely hot water and extreme pH properties to which cells have adapted. Great Salt Lake has the property of being extremely salty, much more so than the oceans, and cells have needed unique adaptations, which also resulted in the pink waters in the northern part of the lake. This will give us a good jumping off point for a discussion of cells. Because cells are ultimately made up of chemicals, we will also introduce some chemistry related to biology. To understand why the hydrothermal features, like hot springs and geysers, exist at Yellowstone, we will discuss the structure of the Earth and what a hotspot is. Since a major focus of experiencing life is on experiencing biodiversity, we will begin a discussion of how cells and all living things are classified. Even though cells are what brings us to Yellowstone as a starting point, the park is also known for its diversity of mammals, so we will use these animals to further explore biodiversity and classification to give us a good foundation for the rest of the trips to follow. In addition to our goal of trying to experience the diversity of organisms in the country, another goal is to experience the diversity of environments in the U.S., including different forest types. Trip 1 will expose us to 2 of the forest types described by the U.S. Forest Service, the lodgepole pine forest type in Yellowstone, and the western hardwood forest type. The western hardwood type is the predominant forest type in the Wasatch Cache National Forest in northern Utah, which is on the way from Yellowstone to the Great Salt Lake. The other site for Trip 1, which is actually a good place to start the trip, is the Wind River mountain range to the southeast of Yellowstone. There are no hot springs or geysers here, but the overall environment is similar to that of Yellowstone, and it is part of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. For this reason, we will use it as a way to introduce the concept of an ecosystem. And that's a summary of Trip 1. Trip 2, in orange, is in the southeastern part of the country. Since we were introduced to biodiversity and classification in Trip 1, Trip 2 will focus on exploring the wide variety of living things and environments. The anchor sites for Trip 2 are the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Everglades National Park, and the waters off the Florida Keys. Between these three sites, it is possible to experience as much biodiversity as you could want. The ocean off the Florida Keys is pretty much the only place in the U.S. where you can experience organisms like sponges, corals, and other subtropical marine organisms in the wild. In addition to the anchor sites, there are other sites on Trip 2 to provide more specialized and/or more easily accessible experiences. The Green Swamp Preserve in North Carolina is part of a very small part of the world where you can experience Venus flytraps in nature. Oconee National Forest in Georgia will represent the loblolly shortleaf pine forest type. Atlanta, Georgia is home to the CDC Museum, where microscopic organisms that cause disease will be explored, though not directly experienced. This will also be the site where viruses will be introduced, and the concept of what defines a living thing will be discussed using viruses as a launching point. Atlanta is also home to the Georgia Aquarium, which will be a place where some of the organisms that can be found later off the Florida Keys can be experienced in a more accessible environment. Before moving on to the Everglades, we'll stop at the Fairchild Tropical Botanic Gardens in Coral Gables, Florida. This is one of the only areas of the continental U.S. where tropical plants can be experienced outdoors. After the Everglades and the Florida Keys Marine Sanctuary, the last stop will be the Okefenokee Swamp on the Georgia-Florida line. Here you can experience the longleaf pine and oak gum cypress forest types and contrast this forested wetland with the predominantly grassy wetland found in the Everglades. And that's Trip 2. Trip 3 in red brings us to the northeastern part of the country. While continuing to explore the biodiversity found in this area, the focus topics will be ecology and genetics. Using the Adirondack Park in northern New York as an anchor site, we will explore environments like rivers, lakes, forests, and bogs to experience the ways organisms and the environment interact with each other, which is what the field of ecology studies. Another site where we can explore a case study and some ecological concepts is the Lyme, Connecticut area. As the location after which Lyme disease was named, we'll explore the species interactions involved in this disease. In addition to the goal of experiencing natural ecological processes, Trip 3 will discuss ways humans have and could affect these natural processes. Acid rain has affected the Adirondacks. 3 Mile Island was the site of a crisis in 1979 where a partial meltdown occurred and released radioactive gas into the environment. And Love Canal was a site where toxic waste was dumped and affected the health of residents in the area. We'll look at the effect these incidents had on the environment in contrast to natural ecological processes. While we're in the Love Canal area, we'll visit a site which gives the name of the Experiencing Life series a double entendre. In addition to experiencing life in the sense of biological concepts, the series is also set up to provide experiences that make your personal human life exciting, interesting, and fulfilling. Toward that goal, we'll visit Niagara Falls, one of the sites that every American should experience. With ecology and the environment as foci for Trip 3, it makes sense to visit a site that explores one of the pioneers of the environmental movement, Henry David Thoreau. Walden Pond, where Thoreau spent 2 years of his life formulating his ideas on living simply in nature, is now part of the Massachusetts State Park System. There are not many natural national parks in the eastern U.S., especially the Northeast, but there is one that we'll visit in Trip 3. Acadia National Park is on an island along the coast of Maine. It is a good place to experience shorebirds and intertidal organisms. It is also a good jumping-off point for the ocean waters of the Gulf of Maine, where you can experience whales, puffins, and more. While experiencing genetics is a little more difficult than experiencing ecology, we will also use Trip 3 to experience Mendelian genetics by looking at pea plants and fruit flies, as well as discussing molecular genetics and the chemical basis of inherited traits. And that sums up Trip 3. Trip 4 in yellow takes us back west to the Four Corners states. With a good foundation of biology from the first 3 trips, Trip 4 will take a look at how biology has played out over time and focus on evolution and biodiversity from the past. Because some of the evidence related to evolution involves rocks and fossils, geology will also be a focus of Trip 4. The trip starts with an orientation at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. Here you can experience fossils and other exhibits in an artificial environment where things have been cleaned up and put on display for clarity. They also have great exhibits on minerals and some of the basics of geology. From there, we'll head to some more natural environments to see how things are before they get to a museum. The first place for this is Comanche National Grassland in southeastern Colorado. Here, along the Purgatoire River, is a place where you can experience dinosaur tracks that have been preserved in the rocks. Next, we head into the mountains and Florissant Fossil Beds National Monument. Here, the rocks exposed were formed during the Eocene epoch, and the abundant plant and insect fossils found in them are from about 35 million years ago. Then we head to northeastern Utah, where the rocks exposed are from the Jurassic period at Dinosaur National Monument. With the fossils here being about 114 million years older than those at Florissant, we can really start to see how things have changed over time. There are also very good opportunities for experiencing fossils in place where they were discovered, both in the visitor center and along the nearby trail. The next 3 stops help us to experience concepts of geology and how rocks form with or without fossils. The Grand Staircase in southern Utah and northern Arizona is the name given to a series of layers of rocks formed over many millions of years. The first stop, Bryce Canyon, is the top of the staircase and contains the newest layers of rock. Here you can see rock formations called hoodoos as you experience sedimentary rocks. Zion National Park is next, where the top layers of rock there correlate with the bottom layers of rock at Bryce Canyon. Here you can start to experience the connection between rock layers over distance at places like Angel's Landing. The third location, the Grand Canyon, contains the lowest steps or layers of rock all the way down to the bottom of the canyon. The top layers of rock at the Grand Canyon correspond to the lower layers at Zion. Even though the steps are spread out over a wide area, these 3 parks provide a good way to experience the scale of geological processes. Of course, the Grand Canyon is also just awe-inspiring. Teddy Roosevelt said it was the one great sight which every American should see. We agree. It is definitely something everyone should experience. After the Grand Canyon, we'll experience another type of fossil, petrified wood, at Petrified Forest National Park. Then we'll head north towards Mesa Verde National Park, but on the way, we'll take in another type of geological feature called a volcanic neck at Shiprock. At Mesa Verde, we'll end Trip 4 by thinking about the changes that have happened to humans and their cultures. While not exactly biological evolution, these changes show that things change over time. Cultures that once thrived in an area can seemingly disappear, only to leave behind indirect evidence of their existence. This is the type of evidence that supports the theory of evolution and will be a good way to end the trip that focuses on that topic. Trip 5 in purple kind of picks up where Trip 4 leaves off. Along the Oregon Trail from western Nebraska to Oregon are 4 sites that show some of the evidence used to support the theory of evolution: agate fossil beds, Fossil Butte, Hagerman fossil beds, and John Day fossil beds. National monuments are locations with fossils from the Miocene, Paleocene, Pliocene, and Oligocene epochs respectively. They each contain prime examples of the fossils from their time periods and contribute to our understanding of the way things evolved. Then Trip 5 changes focus to the environments of the Pacific Northwest and the biodiversity that can be found there. As a transitional location, we'll take the opportunity to visit the Oregon Brewers Festival in Portland. This will give a context for experiencing the workings of a member of the fungus kingdom, yeast. We'll use this organism as a way to discuss a process that most cells go through, called respiration, and a specific type of respiration called fermentation. Then we head for Olympic National Park. The focus here will be on temperate rainforests and the biodiversity found in those environments. We will also visit the coastal parts of the park and compare the organisms here with those from Acadia National Park in Trip 3. The next stop is Mount St. Helens. The concept to experience here is biological succession. This concept describes what happens concerning living things after a disturbance to the environment. The disturbance here was the eruption of the volcanic mountain in 1980, which wiped out all visible traces of life in the area. How life has returned to the area since then will be discussed. Driving from southern Washington to southern Oregon will allow us to experience a few more western forest types before we arrive at Crater Lake National Park. At Crater Lake, we will explore the concept of a closed ecosystem and see what organisms live in a very deep freshwater lake. The last stop of Trip 5 is at Redwoods National and State Parks. Here you can experience the tallest living things on Earth. After bouncing back and forth between the eastern and western parts of the country, Trip 6 in white takes us to the heartland in the middle. The focus here is on grasslands and the transition from eastern to western forests. This will also be a trip with a number of artificial environments like zoos and gardens. Beginning with the Missouri Botanical Garden in St. Louis, we will be able to experience plants that are not native to the country to add to our biodiversity experiences. To the southwest of St. Louis is Onondaga Cave State Park. This park, surrounded by Mark Twain National Forest, will be the representative of the eastern forest types made up of predominantly deciduous trees. It is also a location to visit a cavern environment and to explore the life found within. From Onondaga, we head west to Konza Prairie, where we can experience one of the 3 types of grasslands, the tallgrass prairie. Here, in one of the most diverse plant communities in the United States, we'll discuss how plants get their energy through the process of photosynthesis. The next stop exposes us to the second type of grassland, as well as an interior wetland, Cheyenne Bottoms and the Quivira National Wildlife Refuge. The area surrounding these wetlands of international importance is made up of mixed grass prairie, which is a transitional type between the tallgrass and shortgrass prairies. Continuing west, we come to a representative of pure shortgrass prairie, Pawnee National Grassland. Here, prairie dogs thrive, and we will discuss what it means to be an endangered species like the black-footed ferret. After experiencing the grasslands that make up the center of the continent, we plunge into the mountains to see the western forests at Rocky Mountain National Park. We will compare these forests to the eastern forests and see what factors contribute to their differences. This is also a location where the alpine tundra environment above the tree line is accessible by car, and the organisms adapted to this environment are a focus. The other 3 sites in Trip 6 can be done in any order that works for you. 2 are zoos and the other one is time sensitive. The Henry Doorly Zoo in Omaha and the Sedgwick County Zoo in Wichita are 2 great locations for experiencing animals that do not exist in the wild in the U.S. The Platte River Valley is the resting stop for thousands of sandhill cranes and other birds during their migration in the spring. If you are not able to visit in March, you may miss this experience, but it is truly one to try for. And that's Trip 6. Trip 7 in light blue starts at the western end of Route 66. Why not follow the historic road a while before getting into the biology sites? You can start at the road's beginning in Chicago, or you can pick it up at various points along the way. The end of the road in Santa Monica, California, brings you close to the first biology-related site of the trip, the La Brea Tar Pits. Known for its fossils from the relatively recent Pleistocene epoch, we'll see some fossils that look familiar but with noticeable differences from modern animals. From LA, we head south towards San Diego. Following the zoos in Trip 6, this area is home to more world-class zoos. Between the San Diego Zoo itself and its sister safari park, there will be more opportunities to experience non-native animals, with an emphasis on marsupials. Also in the San Diego area is Mission Trails Regional Park. This park is the representative of the chaparral environment. Not quite a forest, nor a desert, nor a grassland, this is one of the more rare environments in the world. The next stop takes us back inland a bit to Joshua Tree National Park. Joshua Tree represents one of the 4 main types of desert in the U.S., the Mojave Desert. From Joshua Tree, we head to the wine country featured in the movie Sideways to experience members of the grape family and to get into more detail about the processes of respiration and fermentation we introduced in Trip 5. Then it's up the coast through Big Sur and alongside the Monterey Bay Marine Sanctuary. There are various points of interest along the way, highlighting the organisms living from the shore to the deep ocean, culminating in a visit to the Monterey Bay Aquarium. The next stop is back inland in the heart of the Sierra Mountains at Yosemite National Park. One of the flagships of the national park system, it is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site due to its geologic features and biodiversity, including the most massive living individual things, giant sequoia trees. Just to the east of Yosemite is Mono Lake. A highly alkaline lake, Mono Lake gives us another type of extreme environment to add to the list started in Trip 1. Here we'll experience the unique tufa towers found along the lake as we explore the organisms adapted to the alkaline environment. The last site of the trip, named California, is the only one not located in that state. Great Basin National Park in eastern Nevada is the representative of another desert type, so it makes sense to include it here to contrast it with the Mojave Desert in Joshua Tree. The Great Basin Desert, for which the park was named, is the only cool desert type. The park is also home to the oldest living trees, bristlecone pines. And that's Trip 7. Trip 8 in dark blue is centered around the Great Lakes, and freshwater environments are the focus. This is also a region of the country where the exposed rocks are older, so fossils from the Paleozoic era are a focus. And the third focus of Trip 8 is on physics as it relates to biology and also to human life experiences. The first site visits the Devonian Fossil Gorge in Iowa, where fossils from its namesake period will be experienced in a natural setting. Next is the first of 2 amusement parks where physics will be explored. The Wisconsin Dells area is home to a number of water parks where you can experience Newton's laws of motion as well as some fluid dynamics. Chicago is home to the next two artificial settings. The Shed Aquarium is another world-class aquarium for experiencing organisms difficult to experience in nature, and the Field Museum next door exhibits more evidence of evolution. On the shore of Lake Michigan, Chicago is the place to experience the first of the Great Lakes to be visited. Then we head to the second amusement park in western Ohio. Cedar Point is known as the roller coaster capital of the world, and it is here you can experience more laws of physics. The park sits on a spit of land jutting into the second Great Lake of the trip, Lake Erie. Next, it's up the eastern Michigan coast along Lake Huron to Hiawatha National Forest, where the white-red jack pine forest type is the point of interest. Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore is the representative of the fourth and final Great Lake on the trip, Lake Superior. The fifth Great Lake, Ontario, can be visited in Trip 3 near Niagara Falls. Lake Superior is the largest of the Great Lakes by area and contains more water than the other four Great Lakes combined. Only 2 lakes in the world contain more fresh water than Lake Superior, so this will be a good spot to experience freshwater environments and organisms. The final location for Trip 8 moves away from the Great Lakes to the land of 10,000 lakes, Minnesota. The much smaller lakes and streams at Voyageurs National Park allow us to experience freshwater environments on different scales. Plus, much of the park can only be accessed by getting out on the water by canoe or other boat, so you really immerse yourself in the environment. And Voyageurs rounds out Trip 8. Moving on to Trip 9 in Maroon, we head back to the southwest to experience the other 2 desert types that weren't included in Trip 7. Trip 9 is also a trip for contemplating the relationship between astronomy and biology. On your way, if you haven't tired of trails yet, you could follow the Santa Fe Trail to the beginning of Trip 9. Start in Kansas City and follow the trail to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and you'll be pretty close to the Very Large Array telescope near Socorro. The Very Large Array, or VLA telescope, is not your traditional telescope. It is a series of dishes that collect radio waves from space. In addition to using the radio waves to create images of phenomena in space, they could potentially be used to receive communications from life on other planets. Though this has not been done yet, organizations like SETI use systems like the VLA to work towards this goal. From a tool used to study space, we go next to a site that shows how objects from space can directly affect life here on Earth. The Barringer Meteor Crater in Arizona is a very clear piece of evidence that an object from space impacted Earth and left a crater like those seen on the Moon. A much larger crater, hidden partially by the ocean off of Mexico, is the leading evidence for an event that killed off the dinosaurs. Experiencing the crater in Arizona will help you appreciate that this could have happened. The next location was inspired by the idea of humans living on the Moon or on another planet, but it also works as a laboratory for studying ecology. At Biosphere 2, essentially a huge greenhouse, the original goal was to create a closed system that was self-sustaining, as is the first biosphere, the Earth. While the first experiment in 1991 was not exactly successful in some ways, there were many lessons learned, as happens often in science. After Biosphere 2, we leave the astronomy theme for a bit and explore the desert. The third desert type for us to visit, following the 2 in Trip 7, is the Sonoran Desert at Saguaro National Park. This is where you will find those tall classic cacti with the arms seen in Roadrunner cartoons, for which the park was named, as well as other cactus species. This will give a chance to discuss alternative methods of photosynthesis, like the CAM photosynthesis employed by cacti after being introduced to photosynthesis in Trip 6. Adjacent to the park is the Sonoran Desert Museum, which has exhibits on the desert. Then we leave Arizona and head back into New Mexico and visit White Sands National Monument. This is where we can experience sand dunes and how life has adapted to this shifting environment. Scooting across New Mexico, we reach another unique environment, the cave environment of Carlsbad Caverns. Small caves can be experienced in trips 6 and 7, but Carlsbad contains one of the largest cave systems in the world. Bats and other cave-dwelling organisms will be experienced here. The next site brings us back to the astronomy theme at the McDonald Observatory. The telescopes here are more like what you normally picture when you think of a telescope. We'll explore the discoveries made by telescopes like these, as well as some astronomical concepts that provide evidence for the age of the universe. In addition, we will be able to experience some of the darkest night skies in the country for observing space with the naked eye. The final site of Trip 9 is Big Bend National Park. Big Bend is the representative for the last desert type in the U.S., the Chihuahuan Desert. But Big Bend is not just pure desert. Some of the higher elevations are forested, and the park's southern border is the Rio Grande River with its riparian habitats. With this variety of environments and its geographic location, Big Bend is home to more species of birds than any other national park. And that's Trip 9. Trip 10 in light green is the last trip in the lower 48 states. It covers the urban megalopolis from the Washington, D.C. and Chesapeake Bay area to New York City, so the overlap between nature and urban areas will be a focus. The other focus will be on estuaries centered around Chesapeake Bay. If you are able to start the trip in May or early June, the best place to start would be the western shore of Delaware Bay, just north of Chesapeake Bay. At this time of year, especially in the evenings at high tide near the full and new moons, horseshoe crabs can be seen spawning on the shores near the town of Slaughter Beach and at the Prime Hook National Wildlife Refuge. This attracts many shorebirds, which can be experienced as well. Just down the coast is Assateague Island, a national seashore. Here you can go beachcombing and experience feral horses roaming free. Then we visit Chesapeake Bay. Chesapeake is one huge estuary where there are various places where you can experience the life adapted to this location where salt and freshwater mix. Using oysters as a case study and launching point, we'll explore the challenges organisms face in this environment from both human and non-human sources. The rest of the sites in Trip 10 are in cities and are artificial environments, but they are places worth a visit. The first two sites take us to Washington, D.C. The Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History is one of the largest and best natural history museums in the world. It is right on the Mall in Washington, where you could also visit attractions dealing with American history. The Smithsonian also runs the National Zoo in Washington. This is another place to see animals not native to America, especially the giant pandas. Not far north of Washington is Baltimore, home to the National Aquarium, also one of the best in the world. Next we head to New York for the last two sites. Just like in Washington, New York is home to a world-class natural history museum and a great zoo. The American Museum of Natural History, founded in part by Teddy Roosevelt's father, is on the west side of Central Park. The Bronx Zoo is often ranked as one of the best zoos in the country. While in New York, you will likely notice that some organisms are well adapted to city life. Not just pigeons and rats, but raccoons, waterfowl, and more. These first 10 trips can all be done with a road vehicle like a car and with no passport. The final 2 trips either require a long isolated drive through Canada, which means you'll need a reliable vehicle and a passport, or you will need to take a cruise or a plane flight to even begin the trips. All of Trip 11 in dark orange is located in Alaska. Even if you are able to drive through Canada to begin the trip, some sites will still require other forms of transportation. The very first site, Glacier Bay National Park, is one such site. The only way to visit the park is to fly in or take a ferry or cruise ship in. The biology focus at Glacier Bay is on the glaciers themselves and the life adapted to the type of environment around them, like bears and seals. Another focus is on the life in the waters of the bay, such as whales and invertebrates. Similar to Trip 3, Trip 11 will visit some sites to contemplate the effects of humans on life and the environment. Glacier Bay is one such site. Here, the effects of global warming can be clearly seen by the disappearing glaciers. The second stop of Trip 11 is another such site. Prince William Sound is the entrance from the ocean to Valdez, Alaska. Valdez is the endpoint for the Trans-Alaska Pipeline and is where ships come to pick up oil. In 1989, a ship called the Exxon Valdez spilled almost 11 million gallons of oil into the Sound. How this spill affected the life in the Sound is the focus at this location. Rounding the southern coast of Alaska brings us to the third stop of Trip 11, Kodiak National Wildlife Refuge. Kodiak is home to the largest of all the brown bears, including grizzlies. Isolated on an island with good resources like salmon has allowed their growth. Island biogeography and evolution will be discussed here. From the coast, we head inland to Denali National Park and Preserve. Home to the tallest peak in North America and to one of the most wild, undisturbed environments of any national park, it is an awe-inspiring place with abundant wildlife to experience. At the next stop, the Bering Land Bridge National Preserve, we put ourselves in a setting where we can imagine how the Western Hemisphere has ended up with some of the biodiversity it has. This part of Alaska is very close to Asia, and it is thought that during ice ages, when more of the world's water was frozen on land, the ocean level would drop, exposing land connecting what is now Alaska and Russia. This would allow animals, including humans, to migrate across to North and eventually South America. No, you can't see Russia from the preserve, but by looking on a map, it is not hard to imagine that they have been connected in the past. The preserve is also a place to see musk oxes and foxes. Yes, it should be oxen, not oxes, but it's more fun to rhyme. The final stop of Trip 11 takes us to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, also known as ANWR. Near the beginning of the oil pipeline that runs to Valdez, ANWR has been the site of controversy over whether it should be opened up for drilling or left as a refuge for wildlife. Would wildlife such as caribou be affected if drilling were to occur? If so, how do we choose between the long-term health of an ecosystem, even one upon which we ourselves depend, and the short-term economic benefits of our activities? That is the focus question of this location. As far as experiencing life, this is where you can experience true Arctic tundra as opposed to the alpine tundra at Rocky Mountain National Park, and experience polar bears, musk oxen, and caribou in their native habitat. The final trip, Trip 12, takes us to Hawaii. Hawaii is the only tropical state in the Union, so that type of environment is the focus. But Trip 12 has a little different organization than the other trips. There are so many small sites that could be visited that it is difficult to choose specific ones. So instead, Hawaii will be used as a way to experience the different agencies that preserve our natural living resources and provide us with ways to experience life. An obvious example that we have encountered on every trip is the National Park Service. The National Park Service not only administers national parks, but national monuments, national historic sites, national seashores, and more. In Hawaii, the 2 national parks there would be highly recommended. At Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, you can experience a geologic hotspot in the middle of the ocean as compared to the hotspot at Yellowstone in the middle of a continent. Haleakala National Park is a good place to experience the past results of the hotspot and also the tropical rainforest. National wildlife refuges can be found all over the country. Hawaii has 10 refuges, and you're sure to see organisms there that you can't see at any of the ones on the continent. We visited national marine sanctuaries in trips 2 and 7. Hawaii is home to 2 more of these, including the largest of all, which I will probably butcher the pronunciation of. The Papahānaumokuākea Sanctuary stretches from the main islands of Hawaii along the chain of small islands and atolls to the northwest. The Hawaii Humpback Whale Marine Sanctuary, scattered along the coasts of the main islands, is meant to protect its namesake marine mammals and would be another good one to experience. The other 2 major national agencies do not have any locations on Hawaii, but they have been represented in our other trips. The U.S. Forest Service runs the National Forests and Grasslands, and the Bureau of Land Management administers a lot of mostly unforested land in the western part of the continental U.S. State agencies often play a strong role in preserving locations for life experiences too. In Hawaii, the Department of Land and Natural Resources is in charge of both the state parks and the state forest reserves, which include over 80 locations total. Napali Coast State Park on Kauai is just one of the possibilities to visit. Even city and county governments can be in charge of great locations for experiencing life. The city and county of Honolulu administer nature preserves and parks on the island of Oahu. And it's not just governmental agencies that can preserve land for life experiences. The Nature Conservancy is a nonprofit organization with a worldwide scope, including 10 locations in Hawaii. Because the land they preserve is essentially private land, the policies for each location can vary widely. For some locations, if the purpose of preserving the site is to counteract the detrimental effects of human activity, for instance, visits from the public are not an option, but many are available to the public. Then there are truly private entities. Obvious examples are zoos and botanical gardens, each of which we visited multiple times. In Hawaii, there are 6 zoos and aquariums and 9 botanical gardens. The botanical gardens in Hawaii are well worth a visit because they all tend to concentrate on tropical plants, which are rare in the U.S. After 11 trips where you gain an appreciation for the areas set aside for the public to experience life, it seems appropriate to end with a better understanding of how those areas get to that point and of the groups that are involved so that future generations can experience life as well. So that sums up the Experiencing Life series. By taking the trips, hopefully you will be inspired to learn a little bit about biology, to appreciate the beauty and wonder of our natural environments, and to experience things that you will remember for the rest of your life. Don't just learn about life, experience it. To start getting into the details of the trips, check out the videos on Trip 1 and Yellowstone. To be notified when new videos become available, make sure to subscribe to this channel. For more information about the trips and the experiences you can have on them, visit us at lifetrips.net.